time for the Generation Gap. That's the part of the show where people from different generations debate hot political topics. This week we're going to be talking about Just Stop Oil. On Friday, the 6 Just Stop Oil protesters who disrupted the Grand Prix at Silverton last July were spared jail, with 3 given suspended prison sentences and a 3rd forced to pay a fine. Now, 5 of the protesters ran onto the track after a crash and sat on the track, managing to suspend the race. Cars were still being driven back to the pit lane as marshals and the police dragged the protesters away. So, is this sort of disruptive and dangerous protest justified, or is it simply too dangerous? Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Sean Irish, who is a Just Stop Oil protester, and Peter Bleksley, who's a former police Met detective. Now, Sean, this Silverstone protest was complete madness, wasn't it? It nearly caused injury. We had marshals trying to sort the situation out. You then have, in all of your protests, a huge amount of police involvement that costs them time and hours. How on earth can it be justified?
So my name is Sean. I'm from the Just Stop Oil Coalition, and we were demanding that the UK government end new fossil fuel licences, and absolutely dislike all of our actions. Was thought out and planned. So we went on with a red light when it was safe. You know, we only took up half the road.
Is it ever safe to sit on a Grand Prix track?
Is it safe to do nothing about the climate crisis? That is the real question. You know, at the moment, our government is not doing enough. Their own net zero tragedies have been deemed illegal. They've gotten rid of the Green Day and changed it to energy security because they know themselves that it's not a Green Day.
But our carbon emissions are 1%.
1%
so maybe
of
go and
domestic
protest
emissions
outside the Chinese or Russian embassies.
Absolutely, and you should come with me. But domestic, we're talking about domestic production. This is the problem. So domestically, we produce 1% of the world.
But we're doing better, aren't we?
Define better. So all of our industries...
better than 50 years ago.
So but 50 years ago we produced our own industries. Now we don't. We've shipped our industries to China and India, and now we blame them for their emissions.
Should Just Stop Oil just find solutions to these problems? Your young generation of people who are now more connected with the rest of the world than ever, presumably because of all of the technological advances that have taken place. Your generation, Sean, is absolutely primed to try and come up with some solutions. Instead, what you do is you spend your time gluing yourself to stuff. How does that help? Let's bring in Peter. What's the policing implication of all this?
Well, let me just make this clear. I am no climate change sceptic. In fact, I think it's a very important matter. And I'm a bit of a recycling evangelist, as anybody who parties around my house will tell you. That said, the Just Stop Oil protests have been very, very poorly thought out. In fact, there's been some numbskull, knuckle-dragging kind of tactics which have hoovered up a lot of police resources. Having said that, some of the police leadership has been woeful, lamentable and cowardly even, with a failure to properly enforce the law and to test stated cases.
What do you mean, giving a cup of tea to people like Sean gluing themselves to motorways?
Well, no, actually, obstruction of the highway, which is an offence under the Highways Act of 1980, says that willful obstruction of the highway in any way is an offence. But the Met Police in particular got themselves in such a tangle because there was a stated case that went all the way to the Supreme Court, and there was a ruling that disruption had to be significant before the police could take any action. Well, Just Stop Oil were protesting day after day after day. That should have been an argument for being sigsignificant, and the police should have done more.
Sean, are you knuckle-dragging numbskulls?
I mean, absolutely not. You know, you said it yourself. We are the young generation. We're the most educated generation, and you said we should be bringing solutions. The solutions have been around for decades. You know, we spend £200 million a week during a cost of living crisis, while people of your show cannot afford to feed themselves. We spend £200 million a week to the fossil fuel industry. You know, the only way you can build a wind turbine in the UK with tax exemptions if you own an oil field. You know, it's absolutely ridiculous to make an oil field net zero. You know, while we're not looking at solutions, we're not insulating British homes. And, you know, I agree with Peter on some level. You know, it's like, this is ridiculous that our government has brought us to this point, you know, and they're using, you know, the passion of young people for political gain, and so is the Met Police. You know, they're not enforcing the laws as they stand so that they can bring in new laws that can get rid of dissent, you know. And
Sean, and that is why, in so many regards, you have scored own goal after own goal. Firstly, you've alienated so many people because you disrupted people's everyday lives, and people were very resentful about that. Secondly, you forced the government to create more punitive laws against
didn't,
protest
Peter. You
and
just
disruption.
said it yourself. You
Your
just said
second
it yourself. The
just
laws
bear me
exist
out.
Very quickly,
already.
Peter, and then let Sean
And
back in.
thirdly, Sean, a number of your people went to prison. 3 own goals. You need to learn the art of persuasion and do less protest.
Sean.
You know what? The art of persuasion is absolutely right, and you know what? The suffragettes should have known that. She should have just talked nicely. The queer rights movement should have just asked nicely, and the government would have granted it to them mercifully. We just know that that's historically inaccurate, Peter, and you know it's historically accurate. The reform that the police have been working for decades has been through activism within the police force, police standing out and taking action against the police force, talking about whistleblowing. Are you opposed to that type of action? They're not doing what they should do. They're not sitting in tightly. They're standing out and they're being counted, and you've commended them for that. And now you object me doing it.
Gluing yourselves to objects, roads, stopping people getting to very important hospital appointments, slowing down the economy by failing to allow people to get to work is really not the way to engage with the masses. Powerful, intellectual persuasion is the way to get a mass movement. You do not have a mass movement at the moment. You're a very small number.
30-second response from you on that.
Look, Peter, you know that's inaccurate. We have had intelligent conversations for decades. The IPCC reports. We have had scientists begging and pleading with the government, and the government have said, no, the fossil fuel donation, £100,000 every year to our party, we are not going to go against them. And that's the facts.
But does gluing yourself to the floor really make much difference to global temperatures? Final point, Sean.
Did standing in front of the King's horse help the suffragettes? We don't know until we see the change.